Subscribe to the channel now. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? In the heart of a small town in the American Northeast stood the old Waverly Mansion. Despite its imposing facade and meticulously tended garden, something about the structure seemed to defy logic. Crooked windows that didn't align with the walls, staircases that climbed only to disappear into false ceilings, doors that led to non-existent corridors. To those passing by, it was just an old house. To those who lived there, it was a living, unsettling, and unpredictable labyrinth. The protagonist, Ethan Caldwell-Ethan, a 38-year-old architect known for his talent in restoring historic buildings, couldn't decipher Waverly Manor despite his expertise. Hired by the heirs to inspect the property, he sensed from the first moment that the house held something beyond its chaotic architecture. Ethan was meticulous, observant, and logical, but in that place, his reason was challenged at every turn. On the other side, the antagonist wasn't a person, but the mansion itself, as if it had a consciousness of its own. Every corridor, every door, every window seemed to change position when not looked at directly. At first, Ethan thought of simple explanations: optical illusions, 19th century construction errors, natural wear and tear. However, small pieces of evidence made him doubt. Furniture moved on its own, whispers crossed the empty corridors, and shadows seemed to watch him. As Ethan walked through the corridors, he discovered rooms not shown on any map of the house, with extravagant, almost caricatured decorative details, ceilings adorned with plaster human faces, staircases that twisted like snakes, and walls painted with scenes from old parties, but always with figures in uncomfortable, almost frightening positions. It was as if the house itself played with perception, challenging the sanity of anyone who dared to explore it. The main conflict emerged from the tension between Ethan's rational logic and the almost conscious chaos of the mansion. He needed to understand the structure to restore it, but each step seemed to take him deeper into an impossible enigma. The feeling of being watched intensified, and small incidents began to accumulate. Doors that closed on their own, portraits that changed expression, and the realization that time inside the house did not follow normal rules. Ethan also knew the heirs. Ethan, a distant and reserved family, had inherited the property after the mysterious death of the last patriarch. They were suspicious of the mansion, but their attitudes were contradictory. Some wanted to sell, others to preserve it, and all seemed to keep secrets they wouldn't share. These family conflicts intertwined with the strange phenomena of the house, adding social and emotional tension to Ethan's experience. Even without fully understanding the logic of the mansion, Ethan began documenting each room, each corridor, noting measurements, photographing details, but with each document he created, new anomalies emerged. Stairs that once led to the attic now ended in solid walls. Doors that once opened onto the garden now led to underground corridors. It was impossible to apply traditional architectural methods. The house resisted any attempt to tame it. An element of mystery subtly emerged. Old letters, hidden in secret drawers with seemingly impossible dates, correspondence from people who never lived at the same time, accounts of macabre events unknown to anyone, and enigmatic instructions for navigating the house. Each discovery increased Ethan's unease, making his mission more dangerous and intriguing. The first few nights in the mansion were critical. Unusual sounds echoed through the hallways, footsteps that didn't correspond to his presence, unintelligible whispers, distant laughter. Ethan began to record everything, noticing patterns that seemed intelligent, almost as if the house reacted to his investigation. The perception of reality mixed with the impossibility of understanding the architecture, and he found himself questioning his own sanity. By the end of the first day, Ethan understood that he wasn't just dealing with an old house, but with an enigma that defied human reason. The danger wasn't physical, but psychological. Waverly Manor seemed alive, aware of his presence, and ready to test the limits of anyone who dared explore it. The tension was palpable. Every corridor promised a discovery, every door could be a trap, and every shadow hid secrets that could change everything. Despite his unwavering logic, Ethan Caldwell began to perceive nuances of the environment that went beyond mere architecture. Waverley Manor did not exist in isolation. It stood upon land steeped in centuries of history, witnessing generations of the same family who had built each brick with intentions that were not always clear. Every detail of the construction reflected past decisions, selfishness, vanity, or despair of former residents, creating a labyrinth that was not only physical, but also psychological. The neighborhood around the mansion seemed ordinary, with tree-lined streets and old wooden houses painted in pastel shades, but the neighborhood held secrets. Some residents whispered about the Waverley family, about unexplained tragedies, disappearances, and strange behavior. Ethan began to approach some neighbors to collect accounts, but realized that each story had gaps, omitted details, confused memories, or conflicting versions of the same event. The mystery of the mansion was amplified throughout the community. Inside the mansion, the secondary characters began to gain depth. The heirs, Clara and Jonathan Waverley. They were perfect contrasts. Clara, meticulous and reserved, showed fascination with the mansion's history, but hid a palpable fear of its winding rooms. Jonathan, more impulsive, distrusted any attempt at restoration, concerned only with preserving the property for possible future gains. Both interacted with Ethan in a calculated manner, sharing carefully selected information and testing his patience. Ethan also found echoes of the past. Old portraits showed ancestors in rigid poses, but with gazes that seemed to follow the visitor's every step. Some paintings contained almost illegible inscriptions in ancient handwriting, suggesting family secrets and enigmatic instructions about the rooms. Waverley Manor was not just a building, it was a living archive of the history of a lineage marked by ambition, arrogance, and tragedy. The wealth of cultural and historical details of the United States permeated the narrative. Hand-carved Victorian furniture, crystal chandeliers that reflected light in an almost hypnotic way, wallpaper imported from Europe that faded into unique patterns over time. Ethan realized that each element of the environment influenced not only the sensory experience, but also the decisions he needed to make. The house seemed to guide his steps, suggesting paths and preventing others. The dynamic between the characters became clearer. Ethan, as the protagonist, needed to balance his desire for understanding with caution in the face of each piece of evidence of living behavior in the mansion. Clara provided partial information about the history of the rooms and their origins, but often got lost in irrelevant details that confused more than clarified. Jonathan, on the other hand, pressured Ethan to speed up the work, creating constant tension. This contrast reinforced the conflict. Ethan sought truth and logic, the heirs' self-interest and fear of revelations. Secondary characters also appeared in brief but significant interactions. The retired housekeeper, Mrs. Halloway. It contained old family accounts describing events that seemed fantastical but were only partially documented. The gardener, Tommy Briggs, he showed unease when mentioning nighttime events he himself had witnessed, but always in a subtle, warning tone. Each secondary character added layers of tension, suggesting that the mansion had shaped not only the physical spaces, but the very lives of those who surrounded it. The atmosphere gained density through physical and psychological sensations. The corridors were cold even on hot days. Smells of old wood and faded paint mingled with forgotten perfumes, while occasional sounds, creaks, footsteps, murmurs, created an atmosphere of constant anticipation. Ethan recorded these observations in detailed notes, but with each discovery, new questions arose. Why did certain rooms lack maps? Why did objects disappear and reappear? The house seemed to test not only his technical skill, but also his emotional resilience. Furthermore, Ethan began to notice subtle patterns. Certain corridors seemed to lead to rooms with tragic family stories. Specific doors could only be opened at certain times. Sunlight transformed the spaces, revealing details that remained hidden at night. These elements heightened the feeling that the mansion was an organism, shaping experiences according to the observations, decisions, and fears of those who entered. By the end of this exploration, Waverley Manor was no longer just a setting. It was a living character, interacting with Ethan and the others. The reader now understood the complexity of its inhabitants, the historical and cultural density of the environment, and the constant presence of mystery that permeated every step. As Ethan progressed in his inspections, Waverley Manor began to reveal even more disturbing patterns. Rooms he thought he knew shifted positions. Hallways seemed to lengthen or shorten, and doors led to spaces that didn't exist on the previous floor. With each discovery, the tension increased. Ethan needed to understand the house, but the architecture itself seemed to impede any logical progress. The central conflict between Ethan's rationality and the almost sentient nature of the mansion intensified with the first signs of psychological danger. Personal belongings inexplicably disappeared. Entries he believed to have been correctly recorded vanished from his notebook, and echoes of ancient voices seemed to respond to his own thoughts. The feeling of being watched began to constantly haunt him, making his decisions more cautious but also more frustrating. Jonathan Waverley, uneasy about the progress of the restoration, began pressuring Ethan to speed up the work, suggesting rapid changes that ignored crucial details. Each insistence provoked disagreements, increasing the tension between logic and urgency. Clara, on the other hand, showed growing fear. She reported strange occurrences she couldn't explain, objects moving on their own, figures perceived in the shadows, whispers in ancient languages. The division among the heirs generated new emotional conflicts, which were reflected in Ethan's work and pressured him to make decisions that could have dangerous consequences. New obstacles arose as Ethan explored the oldest and most forgotten rooms of the mansion. For example, the attic, previously considered a trivial area, revealed itself to be a labyrinthine sequence of rooms with doors that closed on their own behind him and walls painted with scenes of ancient feasts and ceremonies. Each wall carried details that seemed to interact with him, encrypted symbols, observant faces, and inscriptions of impossible dates, defying his logical understanding. Ethan realized that the mansion was not only physically unstable, but that elements of family history were embedded in every space, as if the house reacted to his movements and decisions. Secondary conflicts also contributed to the narrative's complexity. Mrs. Halloway, the retired housekeeper, began to bring disturbing information about the Waverley family: mysterious disappearances, strange rituals, secret alliances, and the recurring presence of visitors who never left a trace. Tommy Briggs, the gardener, reported hearing footsteps inside the walls at night, as well as observing lights turning on by themselves. Each testimony increased Ethan's unease as he was torn between the need for concrete proof and the growing realization that the mansion possessed a power of its own. The very architecture of the house became a source of continuous conflict. Traditional measurements, blueprints, and engineering calculations didn't work. Walls seemed to move, windows appeared in unexpected places, staircases led to rooms that only existed for a few minutes before disappearing. Every attempt to document the structure was thwarted, creating a cycle of tension that challenged Ethan's patience and sanity. The mansion was not just a building, but an active opponent, shaping the plot and challenging the protagonist. Meanwhile, human relationships intensified the conflict. Clara displayed a mixture of curiosity and fear, often preventing Ethan from exploring certain areas. Frustrated, Jonathan began making rash decisions, such as attempting to enter restricted rooms alone or removing objects of historical value without fully understanding the consequences. These actions resulted in minor accidents, furniture being moved, and even minor injuries, increasing the tension. The psychological element also intensified. Ethan began to feel that every step within the mansion carried consequences. Nightmares and memory lapses began to affect him, and small signs, doors slamming shut abruptly, lights flickering erratically, echoes of voices, amplified his anxiety. He found himself questioning his own perception, fearing that any action could trigger a larger yet unknown event. The conflict reached a critical point when Ethan discovered a secret room, hidden behind a mobile bookcase. Inside were old records of the Waverley family, containing details of past tragedies, power schemes, family alliances, and obsessive behaviors that seemed to influence the very architecture of the mansion. At the same time, the room seemed to react to his presence. The air became heavy, doors that were previously closed began to creak, and shadows moved unsettlingly. Ethan realized he was dealing with something much bigger than simple buildings and family heirlooms. He was facing a living force, shaped by history and the secrets of generations. At this stage, the main conflict was already clear. Ethan's battle was not only against the mansion, but against time, logic, the heirs, and his own sanity. Each obstacle brought new layers of tension, while subplots, family conflicts, mysterious disappearances, and inexplicable phenomena reinforced the central enigma. The narrative became progressively more intense, with each decision carrying weight and risk. As the exploration of Waverley Manor progressed, Ethan Caldwell began to realize that the problems weren't limited to the impossible architecture or historical enigmas. Subplots began to emerge, linking the Waverley family's past, the heirs' secrets, and the strange phenomena within the house, creating an intricate web of tension and mystery. The first subplot involved a conflicted relationship between Clara and Jonathan. Clara grew closer to Ethan, sharing subtle clues about the mansion's history and confidences from her childhood. Jonathan grew increasingly hostile, attempting to discredit him. He suspected Ethan might discover something that would change the family's perception or reveal secrets that should remain buried. This tension between siblings, coupled with the urgency of the restoration, became an emotional battleground, where every dialogue carried hidden intentions and every silence was interpreted as a threat. Another emerging subplot was the mysterious history of retired housekeeper Mrs. Halloway. She began providing details of past incidents, including accounts of missing guests, strange ceremonies, and nighttime visits from figures no one could identify. Each story seemed to intertwine with the phenomena Ethan witnessed, suggesting that the mansion not only reflected but amplified past traumas. These accounts also provided indirect clues about how to navigate the house's shifting corridors, making Mrs. Halloway an ambiguous guide, reliable yet enigmatic and partly contradictory. The gardener, Tommy Briggs. This added an additional layer of complexity. He reported events that seemed like simple coincidences to Clara and Jonathan, but which Ethan began to document as recurring patterns. Lights that turned on by themselves in specific rooms, doors that could only be opened when certain pieces of furniture were in exact positions, and nighttime sounds that indicated the presence of something or someone unseen. Tommy, who initially seemed peripheral, came to function as a catalyst for narrative tension, providing subtle yet crucial clues about the mansion's internal logic. One particularly intriguing element involved old letters and hidden diaries. Ethan discovered these records, which told stories of family tragedies, secret pacts, and intergenerational conflicts, revealing patterns of obsessive and sometimes macabre behavior. Ethan realized that each document was directly related to current events in the mansion. Rooms that changed position, objects that disappeared, or auditory phenomena that seemed to respond to his movements. These discoveries created multiple levels of tension, historical, emotional, and psychological, linking past and present in a complex web of events. At the same time, the mansion's architecture itself functioned as a living subplot. The shifting corridors, impossible doors, and rooms that appeared or disappeared served as metaphors for the family's secrets. Ethan began to realize that certain areas of the house coincided with specific accounts of past tragedies. The attic, for example, reflected events of ancient disappearances. The secret library held records that revealed manipulation and control. The garden concealed small structures that indicated forgotten rituals or practices. Each space functioned as a secondary character, laden with intentions and mysteries. To increase the narrative pressure, Ethan began to face conflicts of time and rhythm. Jonathan's urgency to restore the mansion quickly clashed with Ethan's need to proceed meticulously. Clara, on the other hand, emerged as a mediator, but her own insecurities and fears created additional obstacles. Every decision made had immediate and unpredictable ramifications. Exploring one room could alter the perception of another. Documents could disappear, and sometimes nighttime events intensified after their investigations. These subplots converged to create increasing tension. Without unnecessary prolongations, the story kept the reader constantly on edge. The mansion, the heirs, accounts of the past, and inexplicable phenomena were interconnected, forming a web of secrets that Ethan needed to decipher. Each interaction, each step, and each discovery contributed to the main arc, unraveling the macabre logic of the mansion, while new layers of complexity made the mission more dangerous and unpredictable. The reader begins to realize that the secondary characters, every architectural detail, and every historical artifact are not merely ornaments, but active elements in the narrative. The tension builds, the urgency increases, and Ethan finds himself cornered by an invisible force that manipulates the environment while trying to maintain his sanity, protect the heirs, and uncover the truth that the mansion insists on hiding. Ethan Caldwell had reached a critical point in his investigation. After weeks exploring Waverly Manor, documenting impossible hallways, rooms that appeared and disappeared, and gathering accounts from the family and residents, he believed he was beginning to understand the house's pattern. But on that particular night, something unexpected changed everything. Upon examining the secret library in the attic, a space that no one could pinpoint, not even the heirs, Ethan found an old diary belonging to the deceased patriarch Edmund Waverly. What began as a curious read quickly turned into a shock. The diary detailed not only the construction of the mansion, but also obscure events that explained the architectural anomalies. Edmund described the house as a control project. Every room, corridor, and door was deliberately designed to test, manipulate, and intimidate any visitor. But the most disturbing part was in the final pages. He claimed that the mansion possessed a consciousness of its own, capable of acting upon those who dared to decipher it. Before he could fully process this revelation, Ethan heard footsteps behind him. Turning around, he realized he wasn't alone. Clara, pale and trembling, she entered the room, holding an old envelope. She confessed that she had discovered correspondence from Edmund that she had never shown Jonathan, letters detailing psychological experiments and strategies for manipulating the family. He knew that the house isn't just walls and windows, Clara said, her voice almost a whisper. He wanted to control everyone who came in here, and now we're part of it. The turning point intensified when Jonathan appeared, furious. He had secretly followed Ethan, trying to prevent any discovery that could tarnish the family legacy. But upon entering the room, Jonathan didn't find Ethan, but rather a corridor that hadn't existed before, suddenly appearing in the attic floor. The door closed behind him, trapping him. Waverly Manor not only reacted to their presence, but acted actively to separate, test, and manipulate each individual. Ethan realized that the strange events were no mere coincidences. Every object that disappeared, every room that changed, every flickering light was part of a deliberate mechanism designed by Edmund and the very living architecture of the mansion. The revelation completely changed the direction of the story. Ethan was no longer just trying to understand the house. He needed Toto survive its logic and discover how to escape it unscathed. As tensions rose, an even more macabre discovery, it happened. Ethan found a secret passage in the attic leading to a hidden basement. There lay the remains of old experiments, furniture arranged in a ritualistic manner, piles of old diaries, and personal belongings of former visitors who had never returned. The mansion seemed to have recorded every step, every mistake, and every human fear. It wasn't just a physical labyrinth, it was a psychological and historical prison, built to confuse, manipulate, and possibly destroy those who ventured inside it. The psychological effect on Ethan was immediate. He felt a mixture of horror and fascination. Each new discovery increased the risk, but also revealed patterns that could help him escape or at least understand the logic of the mansion. Clara, frightened, began to fully trust Ethan, showing him hidden passages and details that could be crucial. Jonathan, for his part, remained resistant, trapped in his arrogance and fear of losing control of the family legacy. The dynamic between the three was now shaped not only by family inheritance, but by the house itself, which manipulated them directly. The turning point reached its peak when Ethan, while trying to record all the details, realized that the time inside the mansion did not follow the normal rules. A minute could feel like hours or days. The clocks worked erratically, and certain doors only opened at specific times, as if the house were waiting for precise decisions. This realization changed everything. Ethan could no longer rely solely on rational or chronological methods. He needed to understand the mansion's internal logic, interpret subtle signs, and act quickly. To conclude the turning point, one last revelation emerged. The mansion itself seemed react emotionally to human intentions. Ethan realized that the house amplified fears, weaknesses, and secrets, as if it could probe the minds of those who inhabited it. Clara and Jonathan were confronted with their own insecurities, revealing old traumas and family tensions that the mansion had hidden or exacerbated. The battle was no longer merely physical or architectural. It was psychological, emotional, and historical, uniting past and present in a macabre web. From this point on, the story heads towards an inevitable escalation. Ethan must decipher the patterns, deal with the pressure from the heirs, and confront his own mind. Meanwhile, Waverley Manor continues to reveal itself as a living, intelligent, and unpredictable antagonist. The reader now understands that nothing will be the same again, and that every future step will carry risk, revelation, and surprise. The turning point left Ethan Caldwell and the Waverley Manor heirs in a state of constant alert. The revelation that the house acted like a living organism, capable of manipulating space, time, and perception, transformed what was an architectural challenge into an intense psychological conflict. Every corridor, door, or room was approached with caution. Every action taken could have unexpected consequences. Clara, shaken by the newly discovered family secrets, began to act more defensively. She withheld crucial information, worried about her brother's reaction and her own sanity. At the same time, her intense fear triggered even more erratic patterns in the mansion. Doors that had previously remained open began to close abruptly. Shadows in dark corners became more persistent. Old objects moved more frequently. The mansion seemed responding to human emotions, amplifying the fear and tension already present. Jonathan, frustrated and impatient, reacted differently. His stubbornness in ignoring the house's warnings and rushing decisions resulted in accidents. A staircase that unexpectedly shifted during the night caused him to fall, injuring himself slightly. but enough to awaken concern and a real awareness of the power they faced. Jonathan's resistance contrasted with Ethan's caution, creating internal conflicts that were directly reflected in the family dynamic. Each wrong decision seemed to provoke an almost vengeful reaction from the mansion. Ethan, for his part, was experiencing increasing psychological pressure. With each step, he needed to balance the architectural logic, the family history, and the unpredictable behavior of the mansion. He began to notice more subtle patterns, rooms that appeared only under certain conditions, corridors that transformed according to his intentions, and objects that functioned as coded signals. This need for constant interpretation provoked mental and physical stress, forcing him to act with precision and speed at the risk of getting lost in the labyrinth he previously called work. The family subplots began to intertwine more intensely. Clara, by partially sharing information from Edmund Waverley's diary, awakened repressed memories and old fears in Jonathan, who reacted with anger and frustration. Ethan began to act as a mediator, trying to remain calm and focus on solving the house's mysteries, but the tension between the brothers was inevitable. Each interaction was charged with emotional tension, and the mansion seemed to take advantage of these moments to amplify the internal chaos. The manipulation of the mansion also began to affect the perception of time and space. Ethan observed that some rooms shifted more rapidly when strong emotions, such as anger or fear, were expressed. Passages that had previously seemed accessible became impassable, and important objects disappeared or reappeared randomly. Every attempt to document or control the environment was thwarted, and the risk of getting lost in the mansion itself increased with each passing hour. Another significant consequence was the emotional impact on Ethan. He began to doubt his own sanity. At times, he questioned whether the events he witnessed were real or the product of his extreme exhaustion. This uncertainty not only heightened the narrative tension, but also reinforced the central theme. Waverley Manor was not merely a physical space, but an active agent, manipulating human perception and emotions. At the same time, Ethan realized that the house's reactions were not random. Rooms, objects, and passageways seemed to follow a pattern, own logic, often related to family traumas and secrets. He began to record patterns, small signs and clues left by Edmund, believing that the key to overcoming the mansion depended on understanding this logic. Every action now had direct consequences. Opening a door carelessly could alter the layout of other rooms, while revealing family secrets could provoke unexpected physical and psychological responses from the house. The conflict began to reach its peak when Ethan and Clara discovered that Waverley Manor. He seemed to select specific moments to reveal information or create obstacles. The house transformed their inner fears into physical and psychological challenges, forcing them to confront past traumas, secrets, and decisions. This active interaction with history and human psychology created a web of tension impossible to ignore, making the exploration of the mansion an experience of mental and emotional survival. By the end of this stage, the consequences of the turning point had become clear. The mansion was not just a labyrinth, but an active antagonist which reacted to the emotions, intentions, and actions of each character. The narrative was no longer just about uncovering the secrets of a building, but about to survive the mansion's own manipulation, balancing logic, courage, and an understanding of family history. Each character would need to confront their own fears and limitations to reach the next stage of the story, overcoming the mansion and fully comprehending its macabre logic. After weeks of exploration and tension, Ethan Caldwell began to understand that he couldn't simply react to the whims of Waverley Manor. He needed to, anticipating patterns, interpreting signals, and taking control of one's own mind. Each corridor, each room, and each object ceased to be mere obstacles and became parts of a system that, if understood, could be used to his advantage. This was the beginning of his transformation, from a rational architect relying only on logic and science to an intuitive strategist capable of reading the emotions, fears, and intentions embedded in the very architecture of the mansion. Clara also began to evolve. Previously dominated by fear and hesitation, she began to observe the mansion more critically, helping Ethan decipher symbols, door patterns, and behaviors within the house. Her courage was not mere bravery, but the result of emotional and intellectual growth. She learned to control her fear, identify subtle traps, and collaborate decisively with Ethan. This change strengthened the dynamic between the two, transforming them into allies capable of facing the most unpredictable challenges. Jonathan, though resistant, also underwent gradual growth. Realizing that his impulsiveness put everyone at risk, he began to observe carefully, restraining rash actions. Although still reluctant to accept the power of the mansion, his respect for the process and Ethan's knowledge grew. Jonathan's evolution, even slow and partial, became crucial for the family to face the next stage. Understanding how the mansion amplified individual traumas, desires, and fears, Ethan developed innovative methods to deal with the phenomena in the mansion. He began to document movement patterns, change schedules, and responses to specific emotions, creating a dynamic mental map. Passages that were once labyrinthine came to be understood as logical sequences, and objects that disappeared or moved were interpreted as signs and clues left by Edmund Waverley's own design. This strategy required patience, discipline, and courage, qualities that Ethan cultivated throughout the weeks of intense tension. A central point in the protagonist's growth was the ability to cope with fear. He realized that the mansion reacted strongly to human emotions. Fear, anxiety, and anger amplified obstacles and changes in the space. By learning to control his own reactions, Ethan managed to reduce the most drastic effects of the house and manipulate the situation to his advantage. This transformation not only advanced the plot, but reinforced the narrative of overcoming adversity. The true challenge was not merely physical or architectural, but emotional and psychological. Clara and Ethan began to explore areas that previously seemed impossible. Using combined strategies, Ethan applied logic and engineering patterns, while Clara observed intuitive signs, small visual and auditory details that indicated the next safe move. Together, they began to decipher the most complex enigmas, discovering hidden rooms, secret passages, and ancient records that revealed the Waverley family's past and explained the logic behind the mutating architecture. Furthermore, the narrative explored the transformation of the relationship between the characters. The mutual trust between Ethan and Clara became solid, allowing them to face increasingly complex challenges. Jonathan, though resistant, began to understand that survival depended on cooperation and respect for each other's abilities. This relational growth became a vital part of overcoming obstacles, showing that evolution was not only individual, but collective. The mansion, in turn, continued to act as an antagonist, but Ethan's strategic approach allowed him to reduce its most destructive impacts. He understood that the key was not in taming the mansion, but in understanding its purpose and working with it, using the architecture itself to advance. Instead of fighting against every unpredictable change, each room deciphered, each corridor interpreted, and each pattern understood, represented a psychological and emotional victory, consolidating the protagonist's growth arc. This phase also included small victories that reinforced the evolution. Ethan managed to access the main attic without being surprised by disappearing doors. Clara located a secret compartment with crucial documents that shed light on the mansion's behavioral patterns, and Jonathan learned to deal with corridors that suddenly closed. Each achievement reinforced the growing sense of control over the chaos, transforming fear into strategy and disorientation into knowledge. By the end of the storyline, the characters were prepared to face the climax. Ethan had mastered a combination of logic, observation, and intuition. Clara had consolidated her courage and perception, and Jonathan, although still resistant, was aligned with the group's objectives. Individual and collective growth and overcoming challenges created the necessary conditions for the narrative to reach its most tense moment, where all skills, decisions, and discoveries would be tested to the limit. Despite the growth and overcoming of challenges by Ethan, Clara, and even Jonathan to some extent, Waverley Manor remained unpredictable. But now the trio possessed the tools to face the most extreme challenges. Each step forward demanded strategy, meticulous observation, and emotional control. The tension grew as everyone prepared for the decisive moment, the final confrontation with the very living logic of the manor. Ethan began to organize a systematic approach, mapping patterns that previously seemed chaotic. He analyzed the sequence of changes in corridors, rooms that appeared or disappeared, doors that only worked at certain times, and the house's reactive behaviors to the group's emotional states. Every detail was recorded in improvised diagrams and precise notes, with colors, symbols, and estimated times. He knew that any mistake could result in blockages, injuries, or even disappearances into unknown areas. Clara, strengthened by the experience of the last few weeks, has assumed a crucial role as intuitive observer. She identified patterns that Ethan's logic couldn't immediately grasp, subtle variations in light, almost imperceptible sound details, and signs indicating traps or hidden passages. Her keen perception complemented Ethan's rationality, creating an essential balance for facing the challenges of the mansion. Jonathan, though still reluctant to fully accept the complexity of the mansion, began to cooperate with the plan using his physical strength and knowledge of shortcuts and heavy furniture. He helped move objects that Ethan needed to study. His resilience and stubbornness translated into practical contributions, becoming an integral part of the preparation. At the same time, the mansion intensified its responses. Ethan realized that events were no longer occurring randomly. The house seemed to test the courage, patience, and intelligence of each character, arranging obstacles in an almost premeditated manner. Stairs that once led to false ceilings now moved to create complex labyrinths. Corridors twisted into impossible circular patterns, and doors concealed crucial documents that could only be accessed under specific conditions. Each action was an attempt to manipulate the residents and destabilize their preparations. The group began to consolidate. Coordinated strategies. Ethan led the pattern analysis, Clara observed subtle signs, and Jonathan handled the practical logistics, ensuring nothing was moved incorrectly or that important objects were lost. Communication between them became precise and concise, essential in an environment that tested not only physical skills, but also psychological and emotional ones. Every step was thought out to maximize advantage and minimize risk, transforming the chaos of the mansion into a sequence of strategic decisions. An important element of this preparation was their solution of secondary subplots. The Waverley family's secrets were partially revealed. Old documents explained why certain hallways and rooms changed. Hidden letters revealed past events that influenced the house's behavioral patterns, and records from former residents provided clues on how to deal with physical and psychological traps. Integrating this information allowed the group to build a more complete understanding of the mansion's inner workings, strengthening their ability to respond. Furthermore, the psychological tension intensified. Ethan and Clara recognized that the mansion could be exploited, unresolved inner fears, attempting to separate the group or induce hasty decisions. They established rules of cooperation: always stay together, confirm patterns before acting, and never react impulsively to inexplicable phenomena. This emotional discipline was crucial, transforming terrifying experiences into strategic learning, preparing them for the final escalation of the narrative. The physical environment was also explored, as strategic ally Ethan noticed that certain rooms functioned as observation and control points. Slowly moving doors could be used to temporarily block paths. Secret passages served as alternative routes to avoid roadblocks or traps. Each discovery increased the arsenal of tools available to face the climax. At the end of this preparation, the trio was aware that Waverley Manor would not be merely a passive adversary. It would continue to react, manipulate, and test every decision. But now, Ethan possessed the knowledge, experience, and strategy needed to face the final confrontation. Clara offered intuitive insight and emotional control, while Jonathan provided strength and practical support. The stage was set, the tension reached its peak, and all the elements, past, present, architecture, and psychology, converged toward the narrative's climax. Waverley Manor reached its peak of unpredictability that night. Ethan Caldwell, Clara, and Jonathan were aware that any wrong move could have irreversible consequences. The entire environment seemed to pulse, reacting to the trio's emotions. Walls shifted almost instinctively, corridors lengthened and shortened, doors appeared or disappeared, and ancient objects moved in ways that hindered every advance. The climax wasn't just physical, it was psychological, emotional, and historical, testing every skill the characters had developed. Ethan led the movement, observing patterns and anticipating changes. He realized that the mansion had set up a sort of final labyrinth combining hidden passages, doors that only opened in response to coordinated actions, and rooms that reacted to fear and hesitation. Every movement was critical. A wrong decision could result in separation from the group, permanent blockages, or dangerous physical traps. Clara, with her keen perception, noticed subtle details. Reflections in the light indicated hidden doors, shadows suggested safe passages, and almost imperceptible sound signals traced the correct path. His courage and intuition, developed over the weeks, allowed the group to identify alternatives that would not be visible through Ethan's logic alone. Despite his initial reluctance, Jonathan acted as physical support. He moved furniture, stabilized unstable stairs, and ensured that Ethan and Clara could explore dangerous areas without accidents. His evolution, although slower, was fundamental to the success of the climax. Each individual effort integrated into a collective strategy, essential to confronting Waverley Manor in its most aggressive state. The tension reached its peak when the trio arrived at a central room previously unknown. In the center, an ancient pedestal held documents, symbols, and inscriptions in forgotten languages. Ethan realized that the room was not only the heart of the mansion, but also the point where the most complex patterns manifested themselves, combining mutating architecture, time manipulation, and emotional responses. The mansion seemed aware of their presence and tested them on multiple fronts simultaneously. As they moved forward, doors closed behind them, corridors appeared ahead, and the floor in certain areas tilted unexpectedly, as if the house itself was trying to destabilize them. Ethan had to calculate each movement. Coordinating with Clara, they used visual and auditory signals to avoid traps. Jonathan intervened physically, preventing falls and protecting the others from moving obstacles. The tension reached almost unbearable levels, but the trio remained united, each playing a vital role. At the climax of the scene, Ethan discovered that the mansion's response was not random, but rather a reflection of the Waverley family's deepest secrets. The central pedestal contained records that revealed Edmund's obsession with controlling not only the architecture, but also his descendants and visitors. Each obstacle in the mansion corresponded to human flaws: fear, ego, doubt, and arrogance. Upon understanding this, Ethan began to use fear and manipulation of the household to your advantage. guiding Clara and Jonathan through calculated decisions that neutralized the most dangerous effects of living architecture. The physical and psychological action reached its climax when the mansion attempted to separate the protagonists. Corridors distorted to create individual labyrinths, doors closed to isolate each one, and objects moved to block paths. But Ethan, with his strategy, Clara with her intuition, and Jonathan with his strength succeeded. Coordinate synchronized movements, avoiding traps and advancing towards the heart of the mansion. Each obstacle overcome represented not only a physical victory, but also a psychological control over the environment, turning fear into an advantage. The final moment of tension occurred when the mansion triggered a series of simultaneous events. Windows locked, lights flickered violently, and hallways reconfigured themselves every second. Ethan realized that the only safe path involved understanding the emotional pattern of the house. The mansion reacted more intensely to fear and despair than to courage and rationality. Using this knowledge, he guided the group through a sequence of precise movements, remaining calm and exploiting subtle signals left by Edmund. At the decisive moment, Ethan reached the central pedestal and rearranged the documents and objects according to patterns observed throughout the narrative. The mansion, realizing that the logic was being deciphered, attempted one last test. A corridor began to disappear beneath them, forcing a desperate run. Clara identified the correct exit through subtle light signals. Jonathan protected the group, and Ethan led the final move. When they finally emerged from the mansion's core, the corridors stopped distorting. The doors remained fixed, and the atmosphere returned to a stable form. The peak tension had been overcome, and the complex and macabre logic of Waverley Manor had been understood, not merely as architecture, but as a manifestation of history, emotion, and human psychology. The climax combined intense action, psychological suspense, and a visible transformation of the characters. Ethan evolved from an isolated rationalist to an intuitive strategist. Clara from frightened to perceptive and courageous. Jonathan from impulsive and skeptical to cooperative and attentive. All survived the mansion's most extreme test, demonstrating that courage, intelligence, and collaboration were fundamental to overcoming the most complex antagonist of all, a living house laden with history and secrets. With the climax over, Ethan, Caldwell, Clara, and Jonathan found a moment of respite within Waverley Manor. The walls, corridors, and rooms, which had previously transformed unpredictably, now remained stable, as if the house recognized that its test had been understood and, in a way, overcome. The trio could finally assess the results of weeks of tension, fear, and discovery. The manor, though still shrouded in mystery, had yielded to human understanding. Ethan felt the complete transformation in his approach. He was no longer just the rational architect who had arrived at the mansion to document structures. He had become someone capable of reading patterns, interpreting subtle signs, and controlling your own fear in the face of the unknown. This evolution allowed not only for survival, but also for an understanding of the mansion as a living system, where architecture, history, and psychology intertwined. Clara, in turn, consolidated her courage and intuition. The fear that once dominated her was transformed into strategic perception. She understood how the secrets of the past influenced the present, and her ability to identify subtle patterns became vital to her victory over the mansion. Her emotional evolution reinforced the importance of the balance between reason and instinct, showing that overcoming challenges depends on both knowledge and human sensitivity. Jonathan finally recognized that his previous impulsiveness could have been fatal. He learned the importance of cooperation, observation, and respect for the abilities of others. His transformation was less dramatic but equally significant. He became a reliable ally, ready to face challenges with prudence and collaboration. The dynamic between the three characters was now harmonious, each complementing the other's strengths. The heirs, reflecting on what they had experienced, understood that Waverley Manor was not just a building, but an extension of the history and secrets of their family. Each room, hallway, and object carried memories of past generations, revealing traumas, obsessions, and choices that shaped not only the architecture, but the very lives of the Waverley family. This understanding brought clarity and respect for the family legacy, transforming initial fear into admiration and conscious care. The triumph over the mansion had tangible and intangible effects. Corridors now remained stable, objects didn't disappear, and secret passages could be safely explored. But beyond that, there was a profound emotional impact. Ethan, Clara, and Jonathan realized that each challenge, each obstacle, and each fear faced had served to strengthen not only their minds, but also the bonds between them. Their experience had prepared them for any future challenge, showing that courage, intelligence, and empathy were more powerful than any physical strength or incomprehensible architecture. The conclusion also offered a final reflection on the balance between past and present. Waverley Manor would continue to exist with its secrets, but the protagonists now possessed the necessary knowledge to deal with it without falling victim to its traps. The family legacy, once shrouded in mystery and fear, could now be approached with awareness, care, and respect. The trio left the mansion not just as survivors, but as keepers of a complex and powerful secret. They were aware that they had faced not only a physical challenge, but a test of intelligence, courage, and emotional resilience. The balance between understanding and respect for the past transformed the experience into a meaningful victory, emotionally satisfying and consistent with each character's journey. Months after the events at Waverley Manor, Ethan, Clara, and Jonathan found themselves closer and more cautious. The manor remained imposing, silent, but now seemed almost peaceful, as if acknowledging the victory of human understanding. Ethan documented patterns for future generations. Clara preserved family records, and Jonathan cared for the physical legacy of the property. Although the mysteries had not completely disappeared, they had all learned to respect the complexity of the house and the secrets it held. The manor, alive and enigmatic, remained a constant reminder that courage, intelligence, and collaboration could overcome even the most macabre challenges. If you were intrigued by the secrets of Waverley Manor, share this story and invite friends to unravel its mysteries with you. Comment on your theories about the hidden patterns of the house, the enigmas of the heirs, and the most macabre events that Ethan, Clara, and Jonathan faced. Every detail of the mansion has multiple layers, and your perception may reveal aspects that went unnoticed. Like, share, and delve deeper into this universe of suspense and tension, where every step is crucial and every emotion influences the fate of the characters.